right, well, this is a little different, I've got to be honest. The education show, and this time brought to you in living color as well as audio. It's so good to have you along with us, so good that you're with us. A couple of guests that we're going to be speaking to today. First and foremost, let me introduce myself. My name is David Watts. I'm going to be hopefully holding this whole thing together during the course of the day. Of course, it's all about Education Week. We're talking financial literacy, and let's start off with the education show because it's proudly brought to you by Zabuza.net. And I thought for the first time, and this is historic, because not only do I get his voice, but I get his face as well. I'd like to introduce you to Malcolm Mooi, who is the founder of Zabuza.net. Malcolm, tell us a little bit about yourself and where did Zabuza.net come from?
Thank you, David. Zabuza.net was a brainchild that came about in 2015. But a bit of background about myself. I'm a computer systems engineer by background. I worked at a multinational technology company for 7 years. And then in 2009, I left the comforts of corporate to pursue my own adventure and started off in the energy sector. And after 2 years, that failed. And then found myself in the education sector. It was during the time of the Limpopo textbook crisis. And so I thought, you know, let's solve the problem of making sure kids have materials at the start of the school year. But when I started engaging with schools and teachers, I soon came to realize that actually the problem is not textbooks. You know, there's not much support for our teachers. And when I started speaking to the different stakeholders, I also realized that there was a lot of silos and fragmentation in terms of the way basic education coordinates itself. And when you think about the vastness of the sector, over 437,000 teachers spread across 26,000 schools, nurturing 13 million learners, it's quite massive. And so, you know, using my background as an engineer and working in corporate, having access to a global intranet, I kind of said, wouldn't it be cool if we could build this common platform where we could connect teachers with all the other stakeholders. And so that's where we started. 5 years later, we are currently a leader in this space. We've got some national and global accolades to our name. And essentially what we do is we serve as a professional learning community. And the idea is we bring all stakeholders together, and our benefactors are primarily teachers and then learners.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. Now, where does the Money Week part come in? Because as I understand it, in 2019, you guys were actually partnered. That was the first time that you took part in this as well. Why specifically the financial aspect?
When we initially started Zabuza, it was primarily around academic support. So we provided teachers with access to resources, lesson plans, classroom activities, textbooks, posters, etc. But what we soon realized is that academic support is not enough. And when we started engaging with the Department of Basic Education, we found out through their research that learner performance was linked to teacher absenteeism. And when we looked at the reason for teacher absenteeism, it was related to alcohol. And when we looked at the reason why teachers were turning to alcohol, it was because they were under financial duress. And that's how we got into Money Smart Week in that inaugural event, because our support for teachers goes beyond academic support. We also look at non-academic support, and financial well-being sits high on top of that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And it also leads me very nicely introducing our next guest. She is the boss lady. She is also the CEO. That's probably the most important part. Kathryn Main from the Money Savvy Group. Kathryn, welcome. It's great to have you along with us. Tell us a little bit about Kathryn Main and about what does Money Savvy Group do?
Thanks, David, for the introduction, the kind introduction. So I am a mom of 3 boys, 10, 14, and 18, and they are very expensive. Teenagers and children are expensive. And I started my Money Savvy business back in 2014. I had just spent the last 4 years financially educating myself and getting myself out of a very bad financial situation. I found myself at 30, pregnant with my 3rd child. My husband had been retrenched or they hadn't paid him for 3 months, and we were 2 months away from bankruptcy. We had no savings, we had no investment, and the only money we had was the 17 Rand we had in the bank at the time. And we felt so hopeless, and we didn't even know how to start when we had nothing. So 4 years later, we were earning between 4 to 6 million Rand a year in our businesses. And I sat back one day and I thought, how did I get to that point? Like, what was it that got me to 30 years old and 2 months away from bankruptcy? And it was purely a lack of education. So we did our first trademark and our first product called MoneySavvyKids, which is still our flagship product today, because we do believe that if we want to change the cycle of poverty on the African continent, or to make any real socioeconomic change, we have to start educating from the children. So our brands have grown substantially over the last 6 years. We now have MoneySavvyKids, teens, adults, and Money Savvy generation, and we spend every day trying to get our Money Savvy message out there.
Which I think is brilliant. And of course, having a platform like this is even better because we've got the podcast and it's going to be on some other social media platforms. Kathryn, if you don't mind though, could we dive in and, I'm going to ask you one of the questions that comes to mind straight away. What are some of the steps that people can take to improve their financial situation? Because let's be honest, with the sort of coronavirus, COVID, things are not great for a lot of people. So where do we start?
So the starting point has to be looking at where you are and being 100% honest with yourself. If you've had a reduced income, you need to cut back on expenses. You can't keep living the same lifestyle if your money has been reduced or if your spouse has lost a job. So firstly, I would say, look at where you are and evaluate how much debt do you have, where can you cut back, put a budget together and be honest with yourself. From there, start looking at what are some of the potential. So life is like a game of snakes and ladders. You never really know what the next roll of the dice is going to give you. So if you get to a situation where you are able to recognize some of the snakes or threats in your life and some of the ladders or opportunities in your lives, it makes it much easier to plan for your financial future. So, some things that might be financial snakes would be divorce, loss of job, having a baby. I know people say babies are blessings, but babies cost money. And if you haven't planned for this additional expense, it can really impact your financial success. Addiction, gambling, death, disease, illness. How many people couldn't work for months with COVID? If you didn't have an income protector in place, you're going to be in a lot of trouble because now you can't work at all and you don't have an income. So also making sure that you are saving every month. Like even when our money is depleted, one of the most important things that we teach is always to pay yourself first. And what I mean by paying yourself first is make sure that you are saving a portion of your money before you're paying your debt and before you are paying your expenses. Because if you're like me or the gentleman sitting next to me and you're an entrepreneur, there's a good chance you didn't make money in January. I know I didn't make much money in January. And if I didn't have savings to fall back on, my landlord would be asking me to move out. It would be a serious problem. And planning for the future. So not just saving. Start going on to platforms like SaveMave and Easy Equities and learning how to grow your income and start looking at passive income streams. But my biggest advice right now is to cut back wherever you can and to make sure that you're putting some money aside and looking at creating more than one income stream.
Okay, so because basically I was going to move on and say to you, if somebody is in this situation where they've lost their job or they've got less money coming in, I think you've pretty much covered that. Cutting back though, it seems like such simple advice, and yet I've come across people who, when you talk about cutting back, they're absolutely horrified. And I know that one of the things we've had to do is when we sort of went into COVID was do a very, very hard look at what we spend money on, how we spent money, and cut back, simplify things. The most important thing, though, Kathryn, that you could say to somebody, if they're in a financial bind at the moment, what is the one most important thing to do?
So before I answer that question, how did you cut back? What were the things that you took off your priority list, and how much did you save on that exercise?
Oh, now we're going to, okay, fine. In the spirit of honesty, cigarettes.
Okay.
Alcohol, not entirely by choice, but cigarettes and alcohol, we decided it was actually by choice because we could have gotten everything on the black market. And also the kind of food we were eating, getting hold of people that we sort of owed money to and said, listen, we can't afford that. Probably, honestly, between 3,000 and 5,000 Rand a month.
And realistically, most people can save that kind of money. So there's a couple of things that are happening in the world that people aren't paying attention to. And one of those things is your bank statements. A lot of people have no clue what they're spending their money on. They're happily swiping that card. They're not checking their bank charges. They're not checking the interest on the credit cards. They're not accounting for the cash that they are withdrawing. They're not accounting for the 10% increases that are happening every single year. And I know, the letters are coming from the banks. Your 10% increase is coming up. So my first piece of advice is, guys, put a budget together with your family. And so firstly, put a budget down of what you think your expenses are. Then pull out 3 months worth of bank statements and 5 different highlighters. And highlight on your bank statements in one color what your expenses that you thought were in one color. Then take all your cash in a different color, all your unaccounted expenses in another color, and then all of your frivolous spending. So when you're buying that coffee on the way to work, or that packet of cigarettes on the Friday at the bottle store, or that lunch or those shoes that you just had to have, and go and add all of that up, you will be surprised how much money you actually waste. So for me, my frivolous spending was around 4,000 Rand a month when I did this exercise, and I've got it down to 0. Like, I don't spend any money that I don't need to spend anymore, and that was an instant saving of 4,000. So for those of you who have had a reduced income, look at your expenses properly, spend an hour doing that exercise, and cut back where you can, and start looking at how to supplement your income. What are some of the things you can do? I think everybody on Facebook sells some kind of skincare product or aromatherapy oil. There is opportunity out there.
I would agree with you. There's definitely loads of opportunities, but you have to look for them. You can't just sort of sit there. And I know a lot of the times it's the shock value. I know for the first couple of months last year with COVID, I was broken. Couldn't think of anything. All I could do is have a pity party, and I couldn't even afford the balloons. So that wasn't the most fun. Malcolm, can we turn to you very, very quickly, though? Because the one thing I'm going to talk to Kathryn about as well is what age do you start teaching kids about money? What is your feeling in terms of Zibuza.net, what we're doing now, the education show? What is your feeling there? How should we be looking? How young?
So I think we should start as young as possible, because that's when the behaviors start taking shape. And kids, by nature, follow what you do, not what you say. And so by introducing them to these types of healthy financial concepts is a great way to start. So I would say all the way through early childhood development at that phase, at preschool level, and then slowly through foundation phase, secondary phase, until FET phase. And what's amazing about Zibuza is that we've connected with organizations like MoneySavvyKids. And so, you can connect with Kathryn through the platform. You can access podcasts that we've shot on the education show. They'll be uploading resources as well that you can download, games, activities that you can start to play with your kids. And then also access to the franchisee holders, that you can look for in your area. And so, that's one way of doing it with your kids. The other way is obviously the support we provide to teachers. And so teachers can come on, connect with Kathryn, access her resources, check the courses that they've got available. We certainly having conversations and seeing, how do we make it the best value for teachers? So something like the CPTD endorsement by SACE, to have those courses endorsed so that teachers can earn those continuous professional development points. And then looking at, there's two sides to it. One is, the teachers get the financial knowledge so they can make informed decisions. Another reason why we kind of focused on this type of non-academic support is, a couple of years back, the department nationally had a huge outflow of teachers from the profession. And that's because brokers were going into schools and convincing teachers to cash in early on their pensions to make that money. And so you saw kind of 40,000 teachers leave the system in a very short space of time. It placed a huge burden on the system. So, we want to prevent that. So working with organizations like Kathryn, hopefully teachers would be able to make these informed decisions about their financial well-being. And then the second part of it, they can repurpose the same knowledge and resources and start using it in their lesson plans. So whether you're teaching life skills, life orientation, EMS, business studies, these are the types of resources now you can use in your lessons to drive that message with learners. But we got to break the cycle. We got to start young. We got to start at school.
Okay, but Kathryn, jump in on this one. I mean, Malcolm mentioned from sort of, I don't know, preschool. Surely, I mean, don't you start teaching kids when they're older? I mean, what is your feeling on this? Where do we start with these children? That young?
So as young as 3, children can start identifying cash and coins and what money is used for and the importance of money in life. My youngest son was 4 when I started this business, and he is more financially savvy than any of my children. And between the ages of 4 and 12 are when the neural learning pathways are developing in children. So if you want to institute a mindset in a child, you do it between 4 and 12. So if I think about myself as an example, what we were drummed into our heads in primary school was you don't litter and you don't waste water. I don't litter, I don't waste water. I've carried those principles through to my children because it was something that is so deeply ingrained in my value set that littering is not an option for me. So, and it's the same with financial literacy. You know, if we create a saving culture and we say to them, every time you get pocket money, you have to put 30% in a savings account, it will become so automatic for them that they will save 30% of everything they earn from day one.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Because as we were talking, I'm thinking back about what are the things. Yeah, I remember those. Zap it in a ZB can. Yes.
Do you remember?
I do.
We haven't forgotten.
We're giving away our
and-
age.
But very often with children as well, it's a monkey see, monkey do kind of thing. So I think mom and dad have to take some responsibility there. Which leads me to the next question, though, for you, Kathryn, is what can parents do to help their children? I mean, let's say mom and dad haven't been that great at it, but they're working on it. How can they do something for their kids?
So firstly, stop making financial conversations taboo in your home. Talking about money is not a dirty subject. Wanting to be rich doesn't make you a bad person. You know, ask any child what they want to be when they grow up, and they will say things like, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a vet, or I want to save the world, or I want to travel the world. But dreams cost money, and we're not teaching them how to build their wealth. So firstly, open up the conversation of communication. Even with lockdown, even I cut back, but I made it a family affair. So we had a budget, we wrote down what we needed to buy, we allocated a price to every item, and I said to the kids, whatever money you can save on the list, you guys can have whatever you want. Even with a small 700 Rand budget, they were still making 100 Rand for themselves to get all the sweets they wanted. So get them involved. Take them to the bank. Open them a bank account. Put money into their account. Make them start paying for their own stuff. Set up a saving pocket for them. You know, these are really easy things that you can do on your app at home. You don't even have to go to the bank anymore. But start opening up the conversations. Open up an Easy Equities account with them or a SaveMave account with them, you know. There's a lot of things that you can do, but start the conversation. And if you're educating yourself, educate your children with you.
Maybe just to add, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Because a community like Sibuza.net connects you with organizations and people like Kathryn. So all these resources are freely available to access, the types of conversations that we facilitate on the platform as well. So importantly, you're not alone. You do have access to a community of people and professionals that can help you, whether you're educating yourself or you want to educate your kids.
That is so important because, you know, when you talked about this whole thing, Kathryn, about this being taboo, I remember when we went through rough times as a kid, the tension would show in my mom and dad, and they would never share it with the kids. They'd never say to us, this is why we were doing this. We never got taught. And I think it's vital, Malcolm, what you say, that you are not alone. I know sometimes it's embarrassing. It's hard to say, I've messed it up. I haven't been as good as I can. But start somewhere. And one of the things we often hear is to start with savings. Kathryn, savings. Why savings and when do we start? He says, rather embarrassed when he asks that question.
So firstly, it's never too late and you never have too little to start saving. So saving is a mindset and a culture. You know, you're paying yourself first. You're prioritizing your own needs over your expenses and the people that you owe money to at the end of the day. So, you know, figure out how important your safety is. So for me, my core value is security. So for me, I need to know that financially I'm secure and my children are secure. So I do whatever I can to make sure that happens. So understanding your core values is one of the most important things when managing your money as well, is if you don't understand what you value, you're not going to spend your money on the right thing. So if you value retiring comfortably, saving is going to be one of those things that you want to do because it's going to help you get where you need to be when you don't want to work anymore. So before you start saving, understand what is it you value, what are you saving for, and set some goals, small goals, and achieve those goals. Like start with something simple like a no-spend weekend, and take that money and put it into a separate savings account. So what I've been doing with my saving was I got to a point where my budget was so lean and I thought I actually can't afford to save any more than I am. So every time I did a transaction, there was 89 Rand 71, 489 Rand 71. I'd take the 89 Rand 71 and I'd put it in my saving pocket. And what I would do is every time I did a transaction or swiped a card or went onto my online banking, I took the change, rounded it down to the closest 100. And I've saved about 4,500 Rand in about 4 months. Wow. And it was literally just rounding down every time I did a transaction, always less than 100 Rand. And it just accumulates really quickly. So the benefit of saving is the interest and the compound interest. We call it passive income. You know, when your money starts compounding and growing, you get the benefit of creating a second income stream for yourself because your money is making you money.
That is one thing. And there are examples, and I'm sure that there's going to be examples available on the Zabuza.net platform as well. But the concept of compound interest, because a lot of people get put off when you go, 50 Rand is great if you can save that consistently, 100 Rand, 200 Rand. But the impact of that over a number of years, Kathryn, is massive, isn't it?
It's massive. So if you had managed to save R1 million over your lifespan, and you had it in a fixed bank account, you'd probably make about 10% interest. 10%, how much is 10% of R1 million? 100,000. So you're making 100,000 Rand on R1 million in a year, in 12 months. Mm-hmm. So then the following year, you've got 1.1 million. Now you're making 10% on 1.1 million, so you're making 110,000.
Okay.
So you actually, when you get to the higher figures and you start compounding at that rate, you really start to see the value and your money really starts to grow in front of your eyes.
Well, there we go. Some very, very sound advice from the boss lady at the Money Savvy Group. That was Kathryn Main. We do have another special guest, and I've been looking forward to chatting to her because I love chatting to her. But before we get onto this guest, I think a nice way of rounding off this particular discussion, back to you, Malcolm. I've read some really disturbing statistics over the last little while. And while we're talking about becoming money savvy, what to do with your money, this COVID has also had a terrible impact upon our teachers, our educators. Did I read right within this last period, we've lost something like 20,000 plus teachers?
Not 20,000.
2,000.
2,000. Yes.
Oh my goodness, okay. I'm much happier then.
Yeah. 2,000 teachers have reportedly succumbed to COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic, which is scary. I think when you look at that number in context of the entire population, I think it represents more frontline workers and police combined that have lost their lives. And that excludes your support staff, your school leadership, and your SGBs. So it's quite scary, you know, how many people have succumbed. But also, I think what is more frightening is that 70% of South Africans don't have a last will and testament.
Yeah, and this is where I think we can round it out and introduce our next special guest. She is the Pro Bono Coordinator at ENSafrica. Hello, Natasha. Good to have you along with us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on the show. I look forward to chatting.
Oh, we're going to chat a lot. I'm going to get into a couple of questions, but before I do that, because some people are probably looking at this going, hang on, it's money smart, it's money savvy, and now suddenly you're wanting to talk to me about a last will and testament. Where does this tie in? And yet it does. It ties in It's so important. And the importance there is, if you die, as people would say, intestate, that means whatever you've worked to save or build up your whole life, you don't get a say in where it goes. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yes, it would be divided, or when you pass on, it will be distributed according to the Intestate Succession Act. So in essence, you won't then be able to determine who gets what. And that's why it's so important, especially highlighted during COVID, but any day actually, to have your last say, to distribute your wealth, what you've worked so hard for and saved so hard for, the way you would like to. So yes, it ties in very, very well with financial planning.
Okay, now just explain, and maybe from the ENS perspective, your perspective, explain to me what exactly is a last will and testament. Because, with TV and movies and that, you see all sorts of things there. Somebody scribbles a little something on a piece of paper before, what's written on the back of a napkin. What are we looking at? What is it?
So it's governed by a particular act, and there's certain requirements. So it has to be in a written format. So it can be written by hand, and it can also be typed out. Then there are certain other requirements. For example, you can draft your first will and testament, last will and testament, from 16 years and older. Then you need witnesses, 2 witnesses, and they'd have to witness each page. They're not allowed to inherit. So a witness can't be a beneficiary, and your witness can be over the age of 14 onwards. And then each thing that you actually bequeath or give out in terms of your last will and testament, it can't be illegal, and the terms has to all be within the course and scope of the law. Then you're going to need someone called an executor. And the executor is going to stipulate and actually be that person when you're not there to wind up your estate. So you need to choose wisely in terms of an executor. We always suggest that you choose 2 executors, because for some reason there might be a situation where the executor, the first one you choose, can't or won't. Then at least you have a backup. So there are certain requirements. So it can't just be scribbled like you mentioned on a napkin. Unfortunately, it needs to meet the requirements in terms of the Act.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, when we talk last will and testament, some of the considerations, because I've heard so many things about last will and testaments. Some people say, just go down to the local stationers, you can get a little form, fill it out, or do this or do this. And, oh yes, I'm just going to get old Uncle Bob to be the executor. This doesn't always work. What do we need to take into consideration when drawing up our last will and testament?
So there are templates that are readily available. We always suggest that, if possible, you get assistance to be able to draft your will, because you want to make sure that when you pass on, everything's sorted and you don't have to, there aren't any hiccups, so to speak. So whilst there are templates, we would suggest that you actually contact a legal professional or someone that you trust has knowledge on drafting of wills, so that they can assist you and ensure that your will speaks to what your wishes actually are, because it's very important that your wishes come to the fore and that they are written in a manner that it's easy to understand and implement. If, for example, you feel like you can't, you're sitting there and you're saying, you know what, I can't actually afford to draft a will, for example. There are various initiatives that happen on an annual basis. For example, National Wills Week, where attorneys and other individuals get together and we assist free of charge with the drafting of wills. We also do it at the pro bono office on a pro bono basis, being we don't charge. So I want to say is, yes, look at those templates, but make sure that if you use a template, it is actually correct and what you write in there, because you'll see there are blank spots in terms of the template. It's done properly. So do consult someone that you trust, someone that has knowledge of wills, be it a legal practitioner, to be able to assist you with drafting it.
And literally, as you say, that is the things that you want to happen. So if my family have irritated me and I want to leave my entire estate to Fluffy the cat, I would be allowed to do that? Or is that one of those
You'd
grey
have
areas?
to see. Yeah, you see, there's all those gray areas, and then you would have to see who would then take I'm just using your scenario, who would then manage the money for Fluffy the cat, for example. And you want to make sure that when you leave the money for Fluffy, it actually goes for the well-being of Fluffy. Or other examples, an attorney or a legal practitioner would then be best placed to explain that to you.
And this is the next question I was going to ask you. We mentioned Wills Week. I think that comes up in, when is that? September and October, around there?
It's usually around about September, October, yeah.
Then obviously people would do that. You can gain access, but it's never a good idea to wait. So would you say it's better to have something rather than nothing?
Yes. But you see, it's not an open and shut answer, because that something needs to be legally valid, because you don't want to have something that doesn't meet all the requirements. And therefore, I want to tap into zibuza.net right now, because we've done podcasts. Actually, I've chatted to you about this. And there we've gone into more detail on what the requirements are for last will and testament. And we know on the platform, we've also shared certain information that talk about what's valid and what's not valid. So yes, please don't leave it to chance, but just make sure that if you're listening, go and use the platform, listen to the podcast, and we have our details there as well, and engage with us so that we can ensure that what you have is valid, so that you cover all your bases.
Fantastic stuff. Malcolm, you happy that people go and look at the website, zibuza.net, check out some of the podcasts? I think it's a great repository for knowledge there.
Yes.
Before I let you go, though, Natasha, one last question. Now, I was 18. I was in love. It was wonderful. I left everything. I did a last will and testament, left everything to my loving wife. And then life happened. And suddenly the loving left. How important is it to update your will, and how often should you do that? Because if I'd left the wife and I hadn't updated everything, she would have gotten the whole lot, and that could have been a bad thing. So how often?
So I would suggest that every time you have a major life change, you have a look at your will. For example, you've had a child, even you've changed a job, you've gotten married, you've gotten divorced. And then just as good practice, I would say even on an annual basis, have a read through your will and then ask yourself, does this still speak to me? Does this still speak to my values? Does this speak to who I still want to leave things to? And then if it doesn't, you can always change it. And if it does, you can roll it over to the next year and then assess that way. But as a starting point, whenever you have what is a big life change, I would suggest that you amend your last will and testament. But as good practice, for example, I re-look at my will. Okay, I am a legal practitioner, so that is my caveat, on an annual basis, just to make sure that everything is still aligned.
Fantastic. Natasha, once again, thank you for taking the time out and having a chat to us. And I know that you guys do some fantastic work. You must definitely go and check them out. ENSafrica, our special guest there, Natasha Wagiet. She is the pro bono coordinator. Natasha, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on the show. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Absolute pleasure. Before we wrap up, though, I want to go back to you, Kathryn, the boss lady at MoneySavvyKids. Last thoughts to wrap up. When we're talking about being money smart, being money wise, what is your last thought?
My last thought is look at intelligent ways to increase your income online. So if you don't have a side hustle, get one, because gone are the days when one person works or even two salaries is enough, especially in times like now. And look at ways that you can automate that business so that you can make money while you sleep.
Oh, I like that idea, making money while I sleep. One of the things that I have picked up from you is you mentioned that if we've got a bit of extra cash, we can have a look at a trading platform. Is that something that you recommend? Where do you go?
So I use two apps. So one is SaveMay, which is an international app, so that you can actually earn foreign currency. And then locally I use Easy Equities.
Easy Equities.
Yeah.
Okay, done. Guess what I'm doing this evening. Kathryn, thank you so much for taking the time out, for chatting to us. We wish you all the very, very best going forward. And if people want to get hold of you via the zabuza.net platform is probably the best way to do it. And we wish you all the best as well. Malcolm, you're not getting away with this. I want some final words from you as well.
So I think, creating a money smart South Africa, definitely connect with us on zabuza.net. It's your online professional learning community where we connect teachers with all the different stakeholders, learners, organizations, and this is where you can get access to resources that we spoke about. It's a place where you can get access to people like Kathryn, to people like Natasha. And I think, like we said earlier on, you are not alone. This is a place where you can find support to realize this Money Smart South Africa.
Thank you, Malcolm. So that wraps it up for this edition of The Education Show. A bit of a landmark for us because it's the first one that we've actually used video recording. So you'll get to not only hear us, you'll get to see us as well. It is true, I am taller than I sound. But to each and every one of you, thank you so much for taking the time out, for joining us. Malcolm, Kathryn, we do appreciate it. To each and every one of you out there, stay safe, take care, and thank you.